Okay, so next up, we want to go over one more little thing about functions and about variables and what we do with them in JavaScript, something we kind of need to go over as we start to move on. It's very important. And what we're going to go over is the idea of passing a parameter, here's another term for you to just stick in your head, a parameter into a function. Okay, so what am I talking about? Well, in this example here, I'm basically doing the same thing that we did in our last example. It's got its object and it's returning the object and blah, blah, blah. But you can see I've called it pick a random word from past variable. Okay, so what's a past variable? Well, that's something we call a parameter. So you can see here when I define my function, there's one difference from what we did before and every other time. Every time we defined a function, we just put these little parentheses like this, and there was nothing inside them. They were just a parentheses, and that was kind of how we tell it, oh, it's a function. You know, when we have function, the name of the function, and these parentheses, then we can make our little function, and it can work. But those aren't just always empty. One of the big powerful things in programming is that you can pass information around all over the place, so that, oh, I did something here with some information and got some result. Now I pass it to some other function and it does something, and all this chain of crazy information moves around. So the idea here is that this is called a parameter. So what I'm doing here, when we look inside the function, we can see that I don't generate the random number inside the function anymore. In every one of these, I was doing it here. I was doing this let random number equals math.random, and obviously we did that every time. But this time, it's not even in the function. So what's happening is that I'm giving the function the random number instead of generating it inside the function. Now, in this case, in the case of this example, it doesn't make a big difference because we're just writing this as something very simple. But I want to illustrate this concept of passing information to the function rather than the function doing it all internally. A lot of times you're going to want to do this. And when it comes to mapping, we're going to do this all the time. We're going to be passing information to different functions, and they're going to be doing stuff with the information that we give it. For a random example, if we want the map to zoom to a certain level, we have to tell a function to zoom to that level. And this is how it works. We give that function a parameter. We give it some value, and then it will do something with it. So in this case, just down below, I actually generate the random number here. You can see I'm doing it outside the function, which we went over a little bit before with the variables and that whole thing I called scope, where you can define stuff inside or outside the function. So I'm doing math.random outside the function. So this is now a global variable. And I'm passing it to this function when I call the function. So just like here, when I tell it to run the function, when I do what we call calling a function or running a function, here I pass it the random number. Now this could be a bit confusing because I actually called this here random number, and so it could be confusing, like, well, I'm calling a random number here and it's also a random number inside here. Is it not just getting the global variable? But let's just try changing it. Let's just try changing it to Victor's great number, okay? Now what I have to do is this function doesn't have any, this random number, it doesn't know what that is. We have to give it the Victor's great number in all the places that we had random number before. So it's using this as the variable to check throughout. But we don't have to call it that when we pass it in. We can call it whatever we want. We could even put, like, 0.45 directly in there, and it will just run with that number active. So it's a little bit crazy, but let's just go with it. So let's try loading this. So we save this and we load it up, and we're going to get a similar example as we've got all these times. We get 0.85. Now where is that console logging? It's console logging right here. So that Victor's great number is console logging 0.85, but that was actually generated here. Now, just to make this really clear, we're going to console log the random number here, and we're going to try regenerating that, come back and check this out. And you can see this first console log, that's this one. So it says 0.29, da, 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 da. And the second console log, that's this one, and it's the same number because we're passing that number into the function. And then it decides, oh, that's under half, return, using that object dot notation we talked about last time, return the first word. So it returns word 1. And we console log that random word here. So I just wanted to go over in this video the idea of passing values into a function. In this case, again, it's not super useful, but we're going to see it over and over and over again, and it's one of the great powers of programming, is being able to pass information from one function to another function, and then here and there, and being able to do things based on some sort of input that's being given. So hope you learned a little bit about parameters and the idea of passing variables into functions. In the next one, we're going to go over how you interact with the actual page when it comes to JavaScript, and come back to our calculator and start to actually make stuff happen on the page. See you soon.